He's brave, he's relatable, he's funny, he's friendly, spectacular, and amazing. But Spider-Man can also be unprofessional, and maybe a little pervy. If you want to keep your childhood memories of Spidey intact, bail out now. But if you want to see Spider-Man for who he really is, warts and all, be warned. Without the veneer of nostalgia, you might not like what you see. Fake news. Peter Parker, through his work with the Daily Bugle, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist, and that means he is expected to adhere to certain ethical standards. He doesn't. In fact, his entire career is pretty much a lie. While Peter tells J. Jonah Jameson that his photos of Spider-Man swinging through the city are candid, he often stages shots in order to get the best angle. In reality, he's shooting selfies and selling them as news. He creates newsworthy events and then uses them to his financial advantage, which is borderline evil. Peter's transgressions are serious enough that he could be legally liable for misrepresentation, fraud, and breach of contract, and he wouldn't have much of a defense to fall back on. In other words, Peter Parker is a hack who shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a camera and should never be trusted with the news. And speaking of cameras, Mary Jane's indiscretions. It's not just fake news that Peter's cameras get used for. He also spends a lot of time focusing on his wife, mostly when she's naked, which you may not completely realize as a kid. In Spectacular Spider-Man number 134, Mary Jane takes some sexy shots to convince Peter to become a fashion photographer, while Peter crawls on the wall and pulls her to the ceiling for some adult recreation. In The Amazing Spider-Man number 300, Peter and MJ break into their new apartment and relieve some venom-induced stress by taking some snaps for their private collection. In The Sensational Spider-Man number 20, Peter takes his mind off a string of recent failures by putting his photographic talents to use in the bedroom. We just can't figure out why Mary Jane would be so eager to jump back in front of the camera during her time off from being a model. Get a hobby, lady. Spider nonsense. Peter Parker was given spider-like powers by a radioactive spider bite, and for the most part, it checks out. Clinging to walls? Sure. Super strength? Absolutely. Jumping extra high? According to science, Spider-Man doesn't even jump high enough. So, where the heck did his famous spider sense powers come from? Spiders can sense movement in the air around them using small hairs on their bodies, and they can track the vibrations in their webs to tell different types of insects apart. That means that Spider-Man should be able to identify nearby physical threats, but his spider sense does much, much more than that.
My spider senses are starting to tingle.
It tells Peter when an enemy is in disguise, or if someone is lying. It guides him to hidden threats. It picks up specific radio frequencies, which is how spider tracers work. Spider sense is less of a biological function and more of a psychic power, and it's not anything like a real spider's abilities, not even close. With great power...
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Except that's not actually how it goes. In Amazing Fantasy number 15, the actual quote reads, "With great power there must also come great responsibility." That doesn't flow off the tongue quite as well as the abbreviated version, so it makes sense that future writers would try to condense it a little bit. It's also a quote commonly attributed to Uncle Ben, but Ben never actually says those words in Amazing Fantasy number 15, Spidey's first appearance. During Spider-Man's origin story, Uncle Ben only has 2 lines. He wakes up Peter for school and comments on how Peter is getting too big to out-wrestle thanks to Aunt May's fat-filled wheat cakes. The quote by which Spider-Man lives his life is only spoken by an unnamed narrator who utters the line as Spider-Man tearfully wanders off into the night, still mourning his uncle's death. "Your whole life is a lie, Spider-Man." Jokes on Carnage. Carnage might be the coolest Spider-Man villain ever. He's like Venom, but faster, stronger, and looks like he's made of meat. He's more than a match for most Marvel heroes. He has complete control over his symbiotes and eats other symbiotes in order to boost his strength. What more could you want in a bad guy? Well, how about some originality? For starters, he's basically a supersized version of Venom, who's already basically just Spider-Man, but evil. The Rip-Off Report is only getting started, though. In his civilian identity of Cletus Cassidy, he closely resembles yet another famous character. If the maniacal grin, sharp cheekbones, and the psychotic disregard for human life remind you of a clown-themed villain, you're not alone. In 2007, Carnage co-creator Eric Larson flat out admitted that Cletus Cassidy is a straight-up Joker knockoff. saying he was inspired by the Joker. I basically drew the Joker and had him colored with regular skin and red hair. Larson isn't the only one who thought Joker and Carnage shared some strong similarities either. In 1995, the Spider-Man and Batman crossover comic saw the Clown Prince of Crime team up with the symbiote to wreak havoc in Gotham City, bringing the Sinister Twins together at last. Spider-Man's terrible friends. Many heroes have personal ties to their arch-nemeses, but Spider-Man takes things to a whole new level. Basically, anyone in Peter Parker's life who isn't dead turns into a supervillain sooner or later. No, seriously. There's Norman Osborn, of course, who happens to be both his best friend's dad and the evil Green Goblin. Once Norman's out of the picture, his son Harry picks up the pumpkin bombs and carries on with the family legacy. The clone-obsessed Jackal is Peter's college professor, Miles Warren. The Molten Man is the stepbrother of Peter's high school crush, Liz Allen. Man-Wolf is Peter's boss's son, while J. Jonah Jameson himself funded the creation of the Spider Slayers, as well as the villainous Scorpion. Ned Leeds, one of Peter's co-workers at the Daily Bugle, spent some time as the Hobgoblin, just for fun, and those are just the classics. More recently, a good friend of Aunt May's, the philanthropist Martin Lee, turned out to be the evil Mr. Negative. Harry Osborn's fiancée, Lily Hollister, reveals herself as the goblin-themed villain Menace. And Phil Urich, nephew of Peter's Daily Bugle pal Ben Urich, decided to terrorize the city as yet another hobgoblin. They say you can't choose your family, but you can choose your friends. If that's really true, Peter, choose better. These people suck. Thanks for watching. Click the looper icon to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Plus check out all this cool stuff we know you'll love too.